Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at 3 Euro board games, the first of which being Galenus. Then we're going to take a look at Lewis and Clark the Expedition, and finally we're going to take a look at the Princes of Florence. Now before I share my thoughts on these games, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to purchasing board games, and if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so let's start with Galenus. This is a 1 to 4 player game, takes 60 to 120 minutes to play, and it's essentially a worker placement game where you're trying to get points by curing these different diseases. Now, the twist on this game in a glut of other worker placement games is that you can switch from placing your workers to resolving the actions whenever you want. And you might want to do that because if you are in, say, a communal worker placement spot, you can make sure that you jump in there before your opponent does. Now, again, the goal of the game is to get points, and you're going to mostly do that by curing these kind of disease little cubes from these cards that come out. And you get some bonus points if you are the one to clear that card off. Now, each person is also going to have their own little personal player board, which represents like a little hospital where you can take in patients from the main cards just to secure them for you, to make sure that nobody else can resolve them on your behalf. You've got some little unique player powers on the player boards, and you are getting more and more efficient at curing these diseases by climbing these 4 different tracks, each representing one of the different disease types. But whenever you get past a certain threshold on these tracks, you need to cash in some of these tokens which you've reserved in this focus area in order to pursue and get stronger and stronger. Now, I actually found this game quite formulaic. It was quite, one track in terms of what you're trying to do, just get better and cure things, get better and cure things. So it was quite procedural, I thought, but again, it did always hark back to that one twist of, shall I stop placing workers and get fewer actions in order to, have the best initiative and resolve my actions? Now, I do really like that mechanism, but I don't think it was enough to rescue this game from the rest of the generic nature of it, because again, apart from that one twist, there wasn't anything here that really did, kind of set my world on fire. There are these variable cards that come out each round, and they're all pretty similar in what they do, because there's like special events on them and things. There are these location cards which can, where you can acquire these books and these different kind of herb types, which will, improve your ability to do different things. But again, I did find it very rinse and repeat. And this was a game that I was tracking for quite a long time on Board Game Geek, actually, because I was really interested in that twist on the worker placement mechanism. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, I was very disappointed with the way this one played out. I'm not saying it's bad in any way, but again, that one twist was not enough to make it feel different from a lot of other, medium lightweight games out there. And it did feel just very generic. Now, there was a few little things in the game that I also did not get along with. So the resource gathering and the different way you're climbing these tracks on your personal player board is fairly interesting, because if one thing kind of goes beyond the scale, it can affect another resource type or another currency. And the same goes if you kind of fall below a certain track. But sometimes, even if you're trying to do good things, it can hurt you by going beyond these tracks. So it was a bit of an exercise of spinning plates, and sometimes it didn't feel intuitive, or it didn't feel right that when you were doing well at the game, you were actually getting punished for doing so. But yeah, this one, again, apart from that one mechanism, it just felt like it fell very flat. It was one that I'm not really interested in going back to, and that's a shame really, because I do like this medical theme. It had some promise there, and that is a mechanism that I'd like to see exploited more and developed more, because it's very cool. It always reminds me of a game like Shakespeare, where you can choose to have more actions but probably go last, or fewer actions but go first. And sometimes that importance of rushing to the certain actions is a real decision to overcome. But in this one, that didn't really shine through, unfortunately, and I cannot recommend it. The box here is way too big. The production is a little bit weird as well, because the components are very small, like all the different tokens and wooden bits are minuscule, and they're quite fiddly to handle. And it just feels a little bit of an amateurish product, I suppose, and the gameplay is kind of aligned with that. So yeah, I cannot recommend this one, unfortunately. That is Galenus. Next up, we have Lewis and Clark the Expedition. This is a 1 to 5 player game, takes around 30 minutes per player according to the box, but we'll touch on that later. Now this is a racing game that is held together with deck building mechanisms, with some resource management, and even a hint of worker placement. Now the objective is to race down this river and through some mountains as quickly as you can and beat your opponents to the finish line. Now, to start with the worker placement mechanism, that is fairly basic stuff. Just collect a resource here and there. Sometimes you have to be quite careful with crowding the board because there is another card that lets you kind of hoard up all the meeples that are the workers and then use them yourself. That part was fine. I don't really have much to say about it. Where this game really shines for me is the deck building and the hand management part and the resource conversion, because there are a ton of cards here and the way that these cards synergize with each other, where one thing can lead to the next thing, is actually really solid. And to go beyond that, the game gets even better because you can actually use cards to activate other cards. So they're always used as workers themselves. So you can use the wooden meeple workers to activate your cards, but you can also use other cards to activate cards. And as you are trying to most efficiently navigate this hand of cards to go down the river, and of course waste no movement because it is a race, that is actually a really interesting decision. And again, that hand management can become quite taxing because you need to think, you know what, I need to use this card, but that card would be really strong if I used it as a worker for another card, and so on. And it's all about trying to pick up that right display of cards, use them in the right order in order to waste nothing, because you even get punished if you have any kind of resources left over, or if you have any surplus cards that you've not used, and you can take these kind of delay tokens which will slow you down. So you do have to play not only cleverly but also efficiently, because if you do not get things exactly right, you can be punished quite significantly for doing so. And I actually like that part of the game. Now it can become a little bit frustrating because you can get caught up in these kind of negative feedback loops where you find yourself in a bit of a hole, and it's quite difficult to get out of it because you're spending so much effort just to shed these penalty tokens. But ultimately that does fall back to your decisions, so it comes back to a decision-making kind of problem, I suppose, and that's all on the players. So actually mechanically this game is very impressive. Again, I love that dual card use mechanism. I love these resource conversion trees. I love a lot about this. But there is one massive problem I have with it, and that is it is far too long. Now this game took way longer than the box suggested. I think it overstayed its welcome for about an hour, which is just, unforgivable for me. So it's kind of one of those practicality issues where the game is really good. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot, but that real issue of this game takes way longer than it should do, because I don't think it really warrants the time it takes. And if you shaved off a huge portion of that time investment, then it would be actually a very good game that I would happily play more and more. Now I know this one is it does have its fans, and I can certainly see why. Maybe if you're not so fussed about getting too many games to the table, if you just want to relax and just enjoy the game and get invested in this one rather than playing lots of them and say, this is our game, we're playing for the night, then you're going to get a lot from it, because again, mechanically it is pretty damn fantastic. But yeah, that for me is a real issue. If I'm going to play a game that's a mid-weight Euro, of course with an element of deck building to it, then I don't really want it to take 2.5, 3 hours. And for me, that is just too much. And I'd rather have it half that length, to be honest. So there might be some house rules in order to speed it up, but for me, it was just too much of an obstacle to overcome. So yeah, this was probably the strongest example of a game that I've played that has been completely debilitated by the length it takes, at least if you're playing by the rules as printed. So yeah, objectively, mechanically, fantastic. Practical, and the length of time it takes is just not on the money for me, and I think that's going to really prevent it from getting my approval or from getting my recommendation in any way, shape or form. So yeah, I'd love to see like a new edition of this, one that does take those things into consideration, because again, just use that same deck of cards. It is really well done. I like the change of pace you need to do, where you're constantly spamming these cards to travel down water, then all of a sudden you're hit with this idea that you need to now travel through mountains. You might not have built your engine to tailor towards that, so you're always keeping these two things in mind and have to have this almost forward projecting in your head, thinking, soon I'm going to go into these mountains and I'm going to need a way to travel through them. So I think I've said what I need to say about this one. Great game, just far too long. That is Lewis and Clark, The Expedition. And the final game I'm talking about today is The Princes of Florence. Now, this is one of the old school Euros dating back to the year 2000, and you might notice this arrangement of designers here. Richard Ulrich, Wolfgang Kramer made some of the best games out there of all time. You know, my favourite game is El Grande. This is the same design duo who made El Grande, so naturally I was very excited for this one. But this is a 3 to 5 player game that takes around 90 minutes to play. Now, this game is actually inspired another game that I've already played, and that game is called Colosseum. A game that I've really enjoyed over the years, shares so many mechanisms with this one. This one is a bit heavier and a bit more stuffy, I suppose, and you can probably see that by the game art and the board style alone. But essentially what you're trying to do is you are auctioning or bidding for these different tiles that you're placing on your personal player board. They come in buildings and different kind of gardens, lakes, that kind of thing. And all these different things you can fill your board up with correspond to these kind of architect cards that will say, you know, this architect wants this in there in the yard, this wants this and this and this. And the more of these things you can tick off, the more points you get. There are ways to boost those points by collecting these bonus cards or these jesters. All with the idea of trying to get as much points as you can for the round. And this game has a fantastic scoring mechanism where at the end of each round, you can choose to cash in the points the money you've given or gained for points. And I love the way that works, where you're put on the spot thinking, you know, you have all this money, how much do you want to cash in for points and how much do you want to save for the next auction phase? And I really like that conundrum. Some great games do that, such as Tinner's Trail, and I tend to always enjoy when I'm faced with that decision. Now, I very rarely say that Wolfgang Kramer games feel dated. I think he's one of these gamers or designers who make evergreen games. It seems no matter what he does, it's extremely clean, and they just hold up very well despite being decades old. I'm not quite sure I can say that with The Princes of Florence, and I don't mean that to say to sound overly negative. There were just a few issues I had with this one, and most of that was due to lucky card draws. So it seems like you can build up a bit of a thing on your board here. You can draw some new contracts. 1 minute they'll match perfectly, and you've got loads of points already in the bank. And the next time you're going to draw something that doesn't match at all, which is just a nightmare. Now, there are ways to change that. There are ways to pick up cards other people have discarded, and it doesn't even allow you to draw 5 cards and keep 1. So you've got loads of mitigation there. But more than once, this has happened to me in a very short amount of time, where it was basically game breaking. I either drew the right card or I did not. And for me, that was just it left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth in that the card draws can play a huge part in the resolution of the game, I suppose. But I love the tension of the auction. There's a strong desire to get everything you want. You can build a little bit of an engine by collecting these building tokens, which will get you discounts on buildings, let you break rules that you wouldn't normally do to get around that restrictiveness, because the board is quite restrictive and tight. And you can even end up getting buildings for absolutely free if you invest enough. And if you invest in something, it means you're not investing in anything else this round. So there's a good kind of give and take, and you have to sacrifice something to get what you really want. But there is a lot I like here, and I don't want this to sound negative. It does hold up well, but there's just those few little issues I have in regards to that lucky card draws that just didn't quite do it for me. So I actually think I prefer Colosseum to The Princes of Florence, because I thought that was a little bit more family friendly, and it was just had a slightly more charm to it, I think. Now, I know this game is getting reprinted this year, so it'll be interesting to see if they have changed any rules or it's just been a carbon copy of the original with some new artwork. But it'd be nice to see a game like this that's still, it's still very strong. These are some of the best designers in the game, but there were so many auction games out there, with so many, polyomino style games out there. There are games that I prefer in each of those categories. Now, this game is a good hybrid between the two, but I think if I want to get a full experience of either of those mechanisms, I'll play something else. So this is a very, very narrow miss for me. I probably rate this like a 6.5 out of 10. just because of those small issues I had. But considering this game is over a couple of decades old, it still holds up well, but not quite well enough to stay in my personal collection. So that is the Princes of Florence. So there we have it, that concludes the video. 3 Euro games here, sadly none of which are going to stay in my collection. Massive shame about Lewis and Clark being too long. Galenus was a big disappointment for me. And Princes of Florence, just those few little issues there. But hopefully you found some value in these reviews. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.